Thank you, Mr. President. Point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, I read the newspapers in Virginia every day, and since this body released its plan for Virginia's biennial budget last week, our editorial papers throughout Virginia have begun to weigh in both on the contents of the budget and on our inability to pass the Senate budget. The Virginian pilot opined that in crafting a spending plan, the Senate took a more pragmatic and reasonable approach and realistic approach. They further noted that our Finance Committee had crafted a reasonable budget plan that provides a clear contrast to the version offered by their counterparts in the House. Now, those are pretty good reviews coming from our editorial boards. And they weren't alone in expressing their satisfaction with the Senate's work, and especially our Finance Committee. The Roanoke Times noted that, quote, senators presented a budget that does more for schools and for local governments. But along with the praise for what would have been the Senate budget plan, Virginia's editorial pages have sounded less than enthusiastic note for the refusal by some in this body to approve this reasonable spending plan. In an editorial specifically calling out our friends on the other side of the aisle, the News in Advance of Lynchburg wrote, quote, they are holding the state budget and all of state government hostage. The editors said Democrats were playing with fire and hoped that, quote, public furor would get the Democrats in line, and soon. The editor said, these games of petty political brinksmanship are getting old very fast. They weren't the only editorial board to use the word hostage reference. In Waynesboro, the News Virginian called it, quote, unreasonable to hold the budget hostage over committee assignments, end quote. They said that legislators, quote, have scored their political points for the year. Now the point is to accomplish the people's business. The Roanoke Times, I read, had a few things to say about that as well. They wrote, quote, Democrats must be careful not to sacrifice important budget principles in their power struggle, particularly over the issue of earmarking sales tax revenues, and they must avoid an extended showdown that puts vital services at risk here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mr. President, that's sound advice. But perhaps the Virginian pilot made the most notable observations of our burgeoning budget impasse. In their editorial, they wrote, quote, using the budget as leverage to prolong a feud over political power is counterproductive. The move mimics the same scorched earth politics that have paralyzed Washington, D.C. So there you have it, Mr. President, Washington, D.C. on the James River. Mr. President, the reviews are in on last week, and they are not favorable to us. It is my hope that when we consider Senate amendments to the House's budget plan tomorrow, my friends on the other side of the aisle will heed these cautions and join us in advancing a bill into conference so that we can begin serious negotiations with the House of Delegates and craft a budget that reflects the priorities of all Virginians. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.